Thank you all for coming. Of the people in this room that I really have to thank, as a complete adult in my 30s, when I returned from the United States, actually, not even from Britain. I went to do my PhD in Britain. When I came back, I taught here for 3 years, 1 year in St. Stephen's and 2.5 in Kirorimal. That's when I met Meera when I was at Stephen's. And then I went back to the US for a postdoc and taught in the US for 3 years, and then came back in my late 30s really and began studying Marathi again. And I'm doing a book right now on Marathi Dalit autobiography, which I've been doing for the last 10 years because learning Marathi is slow. It's not, you can't learn a language, although I have a foundation in it from school. Writing on Dalit autobiographies, which are written, all writing in India, in any language in India, is determined by caste. So you speak a different kind of Marathi and you write a different kind of Marathi. When you're reading a middle class Shanta Gokhale, a Brahmin Shanta Gokhale, or reading a Dalit Urmila Pawar, who's actually quite a Brahminized Dalit compared to the other Dalits who write in a very different Marathi, and the Marathi has different regional styles. And the region determines your Marathi. It's very complicated. So I can't be Jerry Pinto, my disgusting, obnoxious cousin who produces 20 Marathi translations a month, and wrote in a famous article that when he was reviewing Mukul Kesavan's The Ugliness of Indian Men and other essays, said, I, like Mukul, belong to the few million in India who speak only English. Certainly now he's a Marathi expert, but we'll leave that for another day. So I'm still struggling with Marathi. But I grew up with these English poets. So I mean, there was, you walk down the road. I went to Elphinstone College. You walk down the road across and you saw Arun Kolarkar sitting in this cafe. It was terrifying, and all of us knew. Somehow we knew. No one really told us, but we knew you don't disturb Arun Kolarkar, and you don't dare go say hi, and you don't ever dare ask him for an interview. So that was Arun. Then down the road you met a completely alcoholic and swaying like a palm tree, Adil Jasawala, who met me at a poetry reading. I belong to this group called the Poetry Circle, run by various obnoxious people. All of you might know them: Ranjit Hoskote, Arundhati Subramaniam, all these people. Ranjit was my classmate, Girish was my classmate. We all ran the Poetry Circle in the Theosophy Hall, which is Nissim Ezekiel's office. I was Nissim Ezekiel's secretary. He was already beginning to go slightly demented. He would not read any book. He once brought me this great story. He brought me a pile of books and he said, Ashley, which is your favorite book? And I said, Nissim, these are all very different books. One is a novel, one is a book of criticism, one is this, one is that. And he said, no, just tell me, because I have to go to Delhi. These are all for the Sahitya Academy Award, and I have to just nominate one. And I haven't read a single one. And I said, this is great. I nominate Ejaz Ahmed's In Theory. And he went to Delhi and he came back and he said, you're disgusting, Ashley. You nominated a Pakistani? And I said, are you fucking serious? He's been in India 20 years. The Sahitya Academy has put him on the list. What is your problem that he's Pakistani? But Nissim had the most reactionary, obnoxious politics. This was his take on Israel and Palestine, by the way. He said, these Palestinians, they stand on the hill and they throw stones. And I said, yeah. And what did the Israelis throw back, you fucking asshole? But anyway, that was Nissim. But I loved him, sweet man, and I was his secretary. And we held the Poetry Circle meetings in his office. He would go home by 6 and we would take over the office every Friday. And Adil met me at one of the college meetings and came up to me, I mean, he's this big, large, beautiful Parsi man whom I totally wanted to sleep with, but he was also reeking of alcohol. And he said, I'm interested in your stuff, why don't you show it to me? And I said, yeah, you must be joking, and I fled. And then 1 year later, he met me swaying like a palm tree outside Jahangir Art Gallery when I was coming from college, and he said, show me, you still haven't showed me your work, and I was absolutely horrified that he even remembered. And then somehow, I don't know what gumption came into me, and I said, okay, I'm going to show him my poetry. And I went to his house. He has a house on the 17th floor in a Kaf Parade high-rise. I'm from Baikalaya, we come from a different world. But I went, and I met Veronique, and I met him. And he became my best friend ever since, and I just love Adil. That's another presence in this book that's, I mean, crucial. I don't think this book would have happened without him. In fact, the first version of this manuscript, I'll never forget. This book went through 30 years, as I said. In the 20th year or something, I met him in a cafe, some strange kind of green cafe. It's called Above Kala Ghoda, opposite Jahangir, this way. And he met me there, and he saw an earlier version of this manuscript. And he took all the personal poems. I had all these poems about this terrible life that I had with a schizophrenic mother, with a manic depressive mother, and 2 manic depressive sisters. Jerry Pinto's mother is one of them. He wrote a terrifyingly bad novel about it called M and the Big Home. And he just took all those poems and he said, these can't be in the book. And I literally shat my pants. I literally shat, because these were the poems of my life. And he said, these poems are telling us that you had a terrible life. That doesn't do very much for us as a reader. It just tells us, and we say, oh, this guy had a terrible life. These poems don't work. And it changed the entire nature of my collection. And so I'm deeply indebted to Adil. The chai has arrived and the pakoras have arrived. So please feel free to get up at any given point and take some. Especially we have two young ones here. So if you're bored, you can go and have some chai, have a pakora. So that's my history. This book took 30 years. It's a very difficult life. I had an abusive, violent Dalit converted to Christianity father. I had a very, very, very deeply abused mother who was manic depressive, beaten, sodomized, electrocuted, raped, eventually died. My mother's two sisters who I'm very close to, Jerry's mother, Imelda Pinto, who was my closest aunt, and the third in Goa, all of them now dead. So it was tough. And you know, the thing about growing up in a house with mental illness and about being depressed oneself or being a melancholic, I'm basically a classic Freudian melancholic. I was just reading an extraordinary essay by Mira on Wilfred Owen where she talks about the Freudian melancholic. And if you know anything about Freud's Mourning and Melancholia, it's a 12-page essay. Read it. It will change your life. It certainly changed mine. He says that the melancholic is actually stuck. Okay, the melancholic is in love with some figure who has been lost, either really or as in really dead, or just in his or her head lost. And the melancholic is static and punishing himself or herself all the time, abusing himself or herself all the time. But actually also, and this is crucial, but actually also that complaint against the self is actually a complaint against the world. It's actually a complaint against the person whom this person feels abandoned by. So in many ways, it's only when I began psychotherapy in 2015 when my therapist told me, you do realize, Ashley, that you also hated your mother. And the very idea was anathema to me, and I gave this long, eloquent answer about how I couldn't possibly hate my mother. And when the session was over, I just sat back and thought, isn't it fucking obvious you hated your mother? I mean, she came to my school and took off all her clothes. I had to put her clothes on and take her home. She was just not a mother at all. When I saw Girish Shahane's mother, who was Shanta Gokhale, I thought, why couldn't my mother be a writer? And wouldn't it be extraordinary that I would write with her? So of course I hated her. And that's when I realized that my second book of poems is just coming out soon. It's all about my mother. But that's when I realized that we get stuck in certain psychological states, and we find it very hard to get out of them. And this book then eventually became an entirely political book, which is really about stuck forms of politics, which I'm also going to talk about mainly today, which is that I feel like the left and the secularists, I was discussing this with Vivek, and Vivek made this very important point this morning. He said, one of the left's biggest mistakes, he's much more generous as a human being than I am. So he said one of the mistakes the left has done is it is not engaged with textual traditions in Indian languages, and leaving that to the right is a very bad idea. It's a brilliant point. But it's not, that's only one of the left's mistakes. There are about 300 of them. I can list them, some much worse. So this book is about the stuckness of responses to the onslaught of the Hindu right. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. Emergency was too early for me. I was barely out of my chaddis. And even the Sikh riots in Delhi didn't really affect Bombay. We just had a school holiday when Indira Gandhi was assassinated, not that. So my real education starts at the second year of my MA when Ayodhya happened. And Ayodhya also happened, you know, down the road, very far away in UP. I'm in Bombay. Bombay doesn't give a fuck about what happens in Bandra here if you're in Baikala. So it doesn't matter what happens in Ayodhya. But Shiv Sena followed with the riots in Bombay in '93. That was the crucible in which my political sense of being was formed. And I have a poem about it which I'll be reading to you. And then, of course, my career as a gay activist began around that time. And then also my career as a gender rights activist. So a woman was raped in my college, in Elphinstone College, after I had passed out by Shiv Sena MLA, MLA's son, sorry. And we fought the case, and I called my super seniors in college. My super senior in college who had passed out 10 years before me was Teesta Setalwad. I called her and said, you know, I mean, Teesta, we need to file a case. And we started this case, and we got the principal thrown out. But it was so these are the issues I cut my teeth on in India. And then as you grow, we now have this great dispensation that we're all living under. So this collection is really tracking what Uma Chakravarti famously says, you know, we are now, she of course, you know, started in 47. 47 she was an adult almost. So she said that in India from 47 to now, it's about a shrinking of democracy, a shrinking of democratic space, till we are now reduced to 4 feet in Jantar Mantar, right? And that's the dominant metaphor. But my poems are trying to do something different, or at least I'm hoping they're trying to do something different, which is to critique the left and the secularists, saying that it's very easy to say shrinking of democracy, we are now down to 4 feet of democracy, the right is horrible. But my argument is that actually for me the left is more horrible and the secularists are more horrible because they haven't really engaged with the issues that they should have engaged with in this politics. Okay, so that's as a kind of preamble to my poems. I want to now say a couple of things, a couple of warnings actually. These are not trigger warnings because I'm not a typical middle class Indian testicle who follows US terminology and builds my life around US terminology. I hate the US. I hate every word that the US produces as cultural terminology, and trigger warnings is one of my most hated words that I want to just kill people who use it. But I'm not trigger warning you, but I'm warning you that 2 things might happen while I'm reading these poems. One is that I might cry, because a lot of these poems are very close to me, and people are not used to people crying in public. Also, please don't come and console me. Like, I really don't like being touched by man, woman, or cow. So don't touch me if I'm crying. Just give it time, give it space, let the crying stop. The next poem will begin. I'll manage somehow. I'll stop crying. Okay, don't worry about that. Second, I give lots of galis. As you have not already seen, I've given some. तो ये बड़ी मध्यम वर्गीय लोग हैं ना, तुम लोग सब, तो तुम लोग बोलते हो कि गाली नहीं देना चाहिए यार. मोहिंदर फॉर एग्जांपल, भाई सभ्य इंसान होते हैं जो वो गाली पसंद है. I think galis are a very crucial part of political language. If you read the reformers, as Mohinder well knows, he studies 19th century Hindi writing, reformist and otherwise. If you read Phule, for example, Phule is full of abuse, the vicious, most nasty abuse in Marathi. I learnt all my nasty Marathi abuse from Phule. So there's a way in which abuse has its role. So I will be abusing, I will be calling someone Madar Chod here, because actually Madar Chod is a very important word. ये Madar Chod लोग हैं, अपनी माँ को बेच खाते हैं, अपनी माँ को चोदते हैं, तो Madar Chod नहीं तो क्या बोलेंगे? Then you'll say कि अरे औरतों के खिलाफ ये सारी गालियाँ. औरतों के खिलाफ गालियाँ है for a reason यार. Hello, we live in heteropatriarchy. तो किसको गाली देंगे? काका चोद बोलेंगे, मामा चोद बोलेंगे, पिता चोद बोलेंगे, कौन सुनेगा? हंसेंगे लोग. So these galis they hit a man. In Tamil, Tevadiya hits a man like nothing hits a man. In Telangana, Lanja Koduku hits a man like nothing hits a man. Abusing of the mother, even as they sell their mothers first. Okay, so that's abuse is for me crucial. So the reading will last for about 30-40 minutes. I'll try and make it as short as possible. And then once the reading is over, I want you to have a discussion with me, because I think, at least in my conception, I hate people who have normative conceptions of what poetry is or should do. But in my Hi Devangana, come. So in my conception, poetry has to be dialogic, and it has to be talked to other people and with other people. And people have to respond to this poetry. It's like a mushaira, like an Urdu mushaira. I feel like poetry has to be, and not just saying wah wah, irshad, but actually engaging and saying, what does this poem do to me? What is it saying? Why I don't like it? Why I like it? Which is what Meera did when she read my collection. Which is why, and I write a very different poetry from Meera. I mean, Meera's poetry is entirely the opposite direction of mine. It's privatized and interiorized, and it's like this strange glass. You can't even touch it. If you touch it too hard, it might break. And mine is, I'm the whore of Babylon. I'm absolutely, who's that woman who runs around naked on a horse? Godiva, I'm Lady Godiva, and she is, the Lady of Charlotte, who just sits in rooms and thinks about shadows. So for her to look at, and she said it to me while editing, she said, this poetry is very, very different from me, but I can edit it. So this is the first poem from, the poetry book is divided into 4 sections. I'll be reading a couple of poems from each of the 4 sections, and then we'll just have a discussion. So this is the first section, and the poem is called I Am Hungry. And it was the first Dalit suicide that I had encountered in college. This guy, he was a Dalit in a hostel. Typical story, we see it every day. He didn't have any money. The government wasn't sending his funding on time. He hung himself. He killed himself. And he had an incredible suicide note, way more powerful than Rohit Vemula's, according to me. It just said, I am hungry. This poem is called I Am Hungry, for Chandrakant Tapkire. I am hungry. I have said those words too. I know how they deepen the sucking pit of the stomach, stamped with a label that ordained you lesser being, your dreams hanging from the invisible fingers of a state that does not really care. The walls in your room closed in and smashed your ribs. The hole in your stomach widened and swallowed your eyes. Hunger makes every dream a disease, every face a blank space. You did it. You were strong enough. And still our voices do nothing. Your words stuck in our throats. Your friends still hungry. Many do what you did. Our protests lie dead, flapping in the corners of streets. Then this is a poem. I did my PhD in Cambridge, and my PhD was on contemporary Irish poetry. And I went to do field work in Ireland, well, field work, library work in Ireland, in libraries. I'm not an anthropologist, I don't do field work. And I did it in Belfast, and it was the first ceasefire in Belfast. After 25 years, suddenly there was no violence. And this is a poem about that. It's called Malone. I was walking down Malone Road near Queen's University, Belfast, and this is called Malone Road, Belfast, 1996. On Malone Road, an old woman hobbled up to me, wanted to know if the buses were running. She had heard a riot had broken out. The roads were blocked. Buses stopped. She always worried about getting the Sunday bus back. 25 years of it. All the buses fixed in her head in a circular space. I muttered that there was no riot, that there was peace now. The buses were running. But it was a sunny day, and maybe she might walk. I smiled at her weakly. She stared at me in disbelief and walked down the road to ask somebody else. Then I went to New York. I did a postdoc in the US, and I just fell in love with New York. I just think it's the most extraordinary city in the world. Everyone should go if you haven't been. Just go. It's mad. It's brilliant. So this is a poem about a mad black man whom I kept encountering on the New York subway. It's called Mad Black Man on the New York Subway. In the embarrassed compartment, a bedraggled mad black man is shouting, "Real niggers come out only at night." As people get off, he screams, "Get off once and for all. You are discombobulating the system." The train stalls. There's a problem. The police enter. The man turns quiet. After they leave, he mutters, "Your injunctions, your injunctions." This is a poem called Puppy. I'm a crazy dog person. I just love dogs, and especially, and actually not especially, only street dogs. I mean, breed dogs could die as far as I'm concerned. This is a poem called Puppy, about a puppy we found in D school. And yeah, of course, there was nobody to look after it. It was going to die. And Pandit ji told us at JP Tea Stall कि ये मरेगा, तुम छोड़ेगो या तो मरेगा. मैंने कहा चलो यार, I was living in Kishangarh. मैंने कहा चलो JNU ले जाते हैं. उसको JNU में कोई पनाह देगा. JNU is a land of shelter. So चलो, we took it to JNU, and I was sitting in the auto with this puppy in my hands. It's called Puppy. Your tender bones beneath a film of skin against my hands. Your mild-mannered whimpering, a sorry struggle against my hands. Asleep, twitching paws, ears, mouth, a dream of violence against my hands. How do I pretend it is not my heart thudding softly against my hands? This poem is called Recognition, and it's about the 2012 rape case. I'm sure you've heard enough of it. You don't want to hear another poem about it or another account of it, another whatever of it. But this is a poem I wrote about it. It's the rape case in Delhi 2012, which was a shocking case to me. I mean, I was on the roads in Delhi, and it was crazy. On the one hand were these people asking for chemical castration on the right. On the left was a group from Haryana which freaked the shit out of me, called Lat Sena, Mahila Lat Sena, जो लाठी लेके बोलते हैं कि मर्दों को पीटेंगे. मैंने कहा यार ये क्या बात हुई. Behind me was ISA. ISA is a hypocritical organization. It carried a poster on the first day, it's lying about it, saying death penalty. And they have been pro-death penalty in the past. On Billa Ranga case, they were pro-death penalty. Savita Krishnan may deny it till she's dead, but it's true. And so aisa ki gundagiri, surrounded by these people, it was just crazy. You didn't know where you're standing, what are you doing? I mean, I stopped going to the protests. I just could, after second day, I couldn't take it. I just thought, this is crazy. It's crazy. This is called recognition. It's really about the girl at the heart of this case. You were just a girl on her way back from a film with a guy. But you should have known that a girl is never just a girl here. The sight of complexes so knotted, it's a wonder any survives in this place. Perhaps the regular crop of female fetuses wilting in public dustbins are better off. From object of lust to revenge, because you had a voice, you became a poster girl for all our fetid fantasies. But you were just a girl on her way back from a film with a guy. Then this is called recognition. This is still from the first section. If you feel like I'm reading too many from one section, you can stop me and say, next section, please. That's kind of easy. Oh no, I'm happy to say this is the last poem from this section. It's called Death Rites for Ashwini. It's another girl, this time in Bangalore when I was living in Bangalore. And she was a Hindu girl, of course, dating a Muslim boy, of course. Although we don't even know whether she was dating him. She was just standing at a bus stop talking to him. He was a classmate. And then they harassed her, the Hindu right, and she went home. And like all good Hindu girls, what did she do? She killed herself. She committed suicide because समाज में नाक कटा दी लोगों ने. It's called Death Rites for Ashwini. Underage, she was not 18, underage, Muslim boy, lured, rape, shame, friend, relationship. How to disentangle your body from this web of inscriptions? How to ever know your story? How to wash it clean of the shit we fling on it? How to lay it down and read what it tells us? In what to wrap it, to save it from our eyes? The sound of it dying is drowned in our clamorous voices, shouting our shitty twopence as usual, blubbering through the murder of it. So that's the first section. The second section is an overtly political section. It's called Figures of Thought. This title comes from a film by Arun Khopkar, one of my favorite filmmakers, who made an extraordinary documentary about Bhupen Khakar, Nalini Malani, Vivan Sundaram, and who's the fourth person? I can't remember, but the film is called Figures of Thought. And I like this idea, the idea of a human being being a figure, but a figure of thought, or a drawing being a figure, but a figure of thought. So it's a figure of thought, and it's a bunch of figures from India who are figures of thought for me. The first is a poem called Ejaz. I have to read you a little note that I have at the bottom of this poem for you to understand who Ejaz was. In Rakesh Sharma is a well-known Brahmin documentary filmmaker. You know these Brahmin documentary filmmakers, Rakesh, Anand Patwardhan, Nakul Sani, they make nice Brahmin films, documentary films in which we all feel very sad and we try to get secular and we try to get happy. They are locked up in a secular anthropological imagination of the Muslim. I hate their films. They're all friends, I love them, but I hate their films. But there are certain flashes in these films, in all their films, certain flashes that make you think, oh my God, this moment is a genius. This is one such moment. I'm going to read you the note first. In Rakesh Sharma's documentary film Final Solution on the Gujarat pogrom of 2002-2003 against the Muslims, he interviews a small Muslim boy. This small Muslim boy, Ejaz, is now late 20s. I want to meet him in Gujarat, but I can't tolerate the idea of going to Gujarat somehow. It's really frightening. But anyway, he interviews a small Muslim boy called Ejaz, and it is to him that this poem is dedicated. Ejaz saw his male family members being hacked to death, his female family members stripped and humiliated. He wants to grow up to be a Fauji, he says. Fauji, he tells Rakesh Sharma, and kill all Hindus. When Sharma tells him that he, that is Sharma, is a Hindu, and asks whether he would kill him as well when he became a Fauji, Ejaz says no, he will spare him. Sharma asks why? Ejaz says, you are not a Hindu. What am I? Asks Sharma. Ejaz says, you are Muslim. For Ejaz, Hindus are only bad people who do bad things, and so he cannot see Sharma as a Hindu. Ejaz. I wanted to hug you, draw all those pictures out of your eyes, take them into my body. But hearing you speak, I knew how foolish this was. Instead, I want to stay with your little boy's voice as you tell the stories of the pictures, and tell you that you must not be a soldier, that you must not kill Hindus, not because what they did was right, but because you can do so much better. You must learn to paint different pictures. This is a poem from my work in Assam. So I did a literary study in Assam for a couple of months, just studying literary and print culture in Assam. And then I did a second visit to Assam, in which I went as a writing consultant to a project on human rights violations run by the extraordinary man who died, unfortunately, way too soon, but he was an alcoholic. It's the way of all alcoholics. Who did that great work on Punjab, those 500 pages of disappearances and killings in Punjab. What was his name? I'm growing old, it'll come back to me. And I was a writing consultant for his researchers. But he was a great man. He told me, you have to come on the fieldwork trip. So I went to Delhi and talked to Muslims, and I went to all kinds of places. And I thought, yeah, I'm just a writing consultant. I don't do anthropology, as Gayatri Spivak says. Anthropology is not my thing. I don't have an anthropological imagination. I agree with her. I don't have one either. But this man said, no, you must come. You must just come. I want you to sit down there, because then you'll see how it affects the writing of these researchers. You'll see how bad they are. Then you'll see what to improve. So I went. So this is, of course, not a story based on a field visit. The second one that I'm going to read to you is based on a field visit. This is one just of a man whom I loved in Assam. I just loved him. He's called Parag Das. And he was an Ulfa man, and he was an amazing, revolutionary, brilliant thinker. And they shot him dead. They shot him dead while he was taking his little son to school. And the Ulfa killed him. So civil appeal number 2551, 1991, to Rohan Das, the son of Parag Das. Rohan also got shot in his hand, little boy, when they shot his father. Has your hand healed? Does it still ache on winter evenings? Do you still recall that day at school, 8 years old, when strange men pumped lead into your father's body and he never came to pick you up again? Today you are a grown man. Do his words mean anything to you? Budbar, Mas, Nikohar, Ahomya Protidin, Swadhinatar Prosthob, do they mean anything to you? What do all these mean to you? And civil appeal number 2551, 1991, they mean everything to us. They are written in our hands as well. We embraced the pain of your hand that day. Our hands ache too. Then this is a poem. This poem I might cry now because it was horrible. I went to this is the fact finding. This is part of the human rights work. I went to the house of a Assamese Ulfa guy again, brutally shot dead, called Shadinata Pukon. He's also a poet. Yeah? He has a book of poems in Assamese that his friend was releasing that day. This is called fortuitous, serendipitous, whatever. He was releasing that day this book of poems that this guy wrote. And I went to his house. His mother and sister were in the house. They offered me tea, really horrible, milky, sweet, malaidar tea. I don't drink that kind of tea, but I couldn't say no to this mother and sister. Then they brought out a plastic bag, you know, the kind of horrible plastic bag you find in Assam, in which you don't even put gobar. But this entire boy's life was in that bag, from the first school award that he won at a poetry recitation in school to his last newspaper report that announced his death. And his mother just gave me this plastic bag and said, see it. And then I talked to them, and you know, you can't really talk to these people. What do you say? What do you say? I went to another trip to, you know, a guy whose entire house was shot. He was shot dead by the army, his entire family. He was the only guy left. He was showing us the bullet marks in the walls. And there was an army, this is Assam, there was an army, what do you call it, yeah, where they put several sacks and they have a man stand with a gun, outpost, whatever, outside his house, in his house, in the yard. Because he's a surrendered Ulfa, whatever he was. And you know, I was with this Delhi crowd, yaar, half of them, you know, Delhi log, yaar, Delhi ke log mar kyun nahi jate, yaar. So this lawyer was there. All of you know him. I don't want to name him. Ex-married to a great Supreme Court judge. और वो ऐसे बात कर रहा है पंजाबी दिल्ली वाला, अच्छा तो बोल बैठ बैठ बोल क्या क्या हुआ कब हुआ, and this Assamese boy, he's a frail Assamese boy who can barely stand, his entire family, and he's just reeling from this buffalo like Hindi firstly, and from this volume. Tell this Delhi lawyer to shut up, just shut up and let him talk. Sometimes you have to, the only thing you can do to a Delhi wala is say chup kare mother chod chup rahe. Okay, so this is a poem called Plastic Bag. That plastic bag. Your life was handed to me in a fading plastic bag. Newspaper cuttings from your first award at school to the news of your being killed. Your mother and sister, tears still springing to their eyes, still slightly stunned, speaking in halting sentences over milky tea made for me. Your dreams, the congealed cream I blow on in my cup. Your friend gives me a book of poems just published. Your words are hot embers in my hand, and the plastic bag is folded and returned to its place. This is a poem called Spring from the second section. Oh no, wait a minute. Maybe it's not. Yeah. So spring. Now spring, this is what I mean, or what I'm calling the limited nature of secular left politics. I hope that by now all my poems have illustrated to you what I'm calling, my critique is of the left and it's of the secularists, it's not of Hindutva. Hindutva का क्या critique है यार, साफ बात है कि क्या critique है, और हमारा जो response है हिंदुत्व को, ये भी साफ है कि बेकार response है, बकवास है, कुछ बदलता नहीं है. And I'm interested in that. How do we evolve better responses to the right? Vivek says a great response. You rewrite the Mahabharata, you rewrite the Ramayana. That's why I love him. But that's one creative response. How do you otherwise creatively respond to the right? That's another discussion. We'll have it in the remaining hour. Right now, I'm just critiquing the left. So this is a man, an amazing man, a Muslim man. I've met so many of these Muslim men. So he was, of course, called a terrorist, thrown in jail. Wahi kahani, came out, studied law in jail, came out, became a lawyer, started fighting for cases of wrongly accused people. You meet so many of them. Amir Khan, I met him in Bangalore. I mean, he was put in jail for 24 years. Father died, mother got a paralytic stroke, sister got married. Doesn't know who his sister married because he was in jail. And he's saying at the end of his talk in National Law School, Bangalore, यार भारतीय संविधान में विश्वास है, भारतीय डेमोक्रेसी में विश्वास है, कोर्ट्स में विश्वास है. मैंने कहा बहन का लौड़ा क्या विश्वास है यार, what is wrong with you? And he's like no, and he didn't want to talk to me because I said give me a fucking critique. And there was another guy who wrote his memoir in Urdu from Bombay, much better guy. He said नहीं यार बिल्कुल गुस्से में हूँ, क्या बात है, क्या किया मेरे साथ? I said यार तू मेरा दोस्त है, ये दुश्मन है मेरा. So this is another man like that. He's called, there's a beautiful film made about him called Shahid, Hindi film hai, dekh lo. This is about Shahid Azmi from my city, Bombay. The poem is called Spring. There's only one video of him on YouTube. कुछ खास इस आदमी पे है ही नहीं. No one's written anything. There's one video. Okay, the poem is about that video. Watching this video of Shahid Azmi. So Spring, Shahid Azmi. The video has you talking without pause for breath, insistent, almost hysterical, about the need for documentation, local, rigorous, relentless documentation of violations by the state in the name of terror. Your face is full of light, pain in your voice, not your own, but that of others, picked up and helpless, poor and lost. In jail, you learnt the law and let it grow into this love for other people's pain. And this is what I want us to talk about in discussion. My poems end with a poem to Devangana. I'm interested in other people's pain, which is what got Devangana in jail. That's my last poem for the evening. So picked up and helpless, poor and lost. In jail you learnt the law and let it grow into this love for other people's pain. From where does this spring come? This video is all we have of you. Your voice is trembling in it still. We are parched and cannot find your spring. And this last poem is to a friend. She's a political beast. All of you, some of you might know her. If you don't know her, you should just kill yourself. She's called Bela Bhatia. And she works in Chhattisgarh among the Adivasis. And she, she did law some 20 years ago and forgot about it. And she did TIS and forgot about it. And then she just worked in central Bihar with Naxals. And she's such a woman that she can, the Bihari Naxal factions are, if you talk to party unity in the morning, and if the party unity guy sees you talking to a liberation guy in the evening, they'll kill you. They'll shoot you dead. They call shoot each other dead on a regular basis. Bela is the only person who can talk to all of them, and all of them like her. She can go into a basement and find out all the documents of all these parties and where did they break and how did they break. That's Bela. So this is a poem to Bela. Bela keeps visiting me nowadays. Now and then she'll suddenly come to Delhi and say, I'm staying with you. Or in Hyderabad, she came and stayed with me, something. So this poem is called Les Invisibles. It's a film that I made her watch. She's also interested, she's interested in books and films. She did her PhD in Cambridge with me. She's a regular Punjabi girl, yaar. At the end of the day, she's like, chalo nachte thoda, yaar. She's that kind of girl. But also, basically, melancholic, depressed for the last 20 years and on antidepressants since Cambridge. And just unable to write a single book. We both just sit and commiserate each other about writing books, and now that I have a book out, she's like, you betrayed me, you have a book. But anyway, Les Invisibles. Les Invisibles is a film made by one of my favorite French film directors, documentary and fiction, called Sébastien Lifshitz, and it's an extraordinary oeuvre of work, and this is a film about gay men and women in their 50s to 80s, that is pre-Stonewall, pre-everything. Pre-liberation, pre-everything. And Bela saw this all night in my house. That's the poem. Les Invisibles for Bela Bhatia. Our first fight, this was in Cambridge, our first fight was over Medha Patkar. She went to test with Medha Patkar. And Medha Patkar is a nightmare, sorry. And so they had a fight also. They have many fights, but she also loves Medha Patkar because her classmates थे टिस के ज़माने से लड़ रहे एक साथ. And I was defending Medha against some right-wing attack on her at that time. So I was saying, यार Medha जो भी है, you can't do this. And Bela was trying to say that I understand this attack because Medha can be like that. But then she felt terrible about telling me that, so she began crying. So our first fight was over Medha Patkar. Our second was over bisexuality. She was married to Jean Drez. They're now divorced. And she's one of those, lattu about Jean Drez, kind of monogamous heterosexuals. And here am I explaining to her how Freud says we're all bisexual, polymorphously perverse, and she feels very wounded about not being bisexual. And she's like, if Freud says, then I also should be bisexual. Why do I love only Jean and he's a man? And she begins crying again. Pagal Punjaban hai yaar. Anyway, our first fight was over Medha Patkar. Our second over bisexuality and non-monogamy. She's a monogamist to the core. Both times you cried, and I thought, what a bizarre woman. Now I know you better, and even less. You send me banal self-help messages on WhatsApp, asking me to rise and shine, and say yes, written in childlike colors. You once brought a mad, bedraggled woman home and bathed her, gave her a fresh sari. Your pretentious Mallu, pardon the tautology, all Mallus are pretentious. Your pretentious Mallu friend gave you hell for it, and you were momentarily upset. Half in darkness yourself, you are fighting for light for Adivasis, in court, through fact-finding reports, FIRs, talks, walks, treks. You're growing old, your back hurts. Dogs keep you in high spirits. She has a dog called Somari, which means Monday. It's a Chhattisgarhi name. It's beautiful. She found her on Monday. So dogs keep you in high spirits, a flower in a bowl, a splash of sunlight. You always end your complaints about people. She's always complaining about people. Punjaban hai aakhir. You always end your complaints about people with, don't tell this to anyone. Because never trust Ashley. Ashley will tell anything to anybody. So Ashley, don't tell this to anyone. So eager not to hurt anyone while the world hurts you into waking. In my house in Delhi, you watched Les Invisibles late into the night. Quite something was all you said next day. Quite something. This is the third section. No, there's one more here. Love. Oh yeah, I have to read love. I can't read love. There are so many jats in the room, I have to read love. So love is a poem about Manoj Banwala. Yaar. It's a jat in a famous case called Manoj and Babliwala case, which was an inter-Gotra marriage, which of course is not allowed by Khap Panchayats in Haryana. And there's a woman journalist called Chandar Suta Dogra who wrote a book on this called Manoj and Babli, a hate story. And it's in fact a fantastic book. But really what I loved about the book most were these little stories, chote stories inside, which if you blink, you can miss them. This poem is about such a story. So it's written to Manoj. Manoj and Babli are both dead. The parents obviously killed them both, मार डाला दोनों को. ये मनोज की माँ और बहन लाजवाब लोग हैं यार. They have fought this case. So it came to Delhi for the judgment, and this चूतिया judge, क्या नाम है उसके, बहुत पागल आदमी, मरकांडे काजू, gave a judgment saying कि भाई डेथ पेनल्टी इनको, जो खाप पंचायत के लोग को. मैंने कहा कि this is stupid, but this is Markande trying to make a point. So anyway, this mother and sister fought the case. They got boycotted by the village. They had to go and buy दूध also from आगे वाला village, कि कोई दूध नहीं बेचेगा उनको, क्योंकि उन्होंने खाप पंचायत के खिलाफ केस लगाया. लड़की बनना चाहती थी, पुलिस ऑफिसर के लिए ट्रेनिंग किया, फिर उस मैजिस्ट्रेट बन गई बहन उसकी. माँ गवार है, मतलब अनपढ़ है. And she went, look at this mother, I love this mother the most. This is called a Haryanvi woman, yeah, this is called a Jatni. She went and voted on the Khap Panchayat banned voting in that village, because you are against Khap Panchayat means you have to, will ban. But you can't ban an election, the voting will happen, nobody goes. Banning means nobody will go and vote in that gaon. She went and voted and came back. And Chandar Sutra Dogra asked her, किसको वोट दिया? मुझे क्या पता, छोड़ो यार, वोट दिया, बस देना था, गांव को दिखाना था कि मैं वोट करूंगी. इसको कहते हैं जाटनी. So this poem is about Manoj though, the man. And again, it's based on these little stories. So his friends, Manoj के दोस्त है जो जाट, बच्चे मतलब जवान, सचिन जैसे 25 साल के. तो you're not supposed to go to a Jat house where the Khap has banned this house. They go and they have chai in this house. This is this poem. Love, for Manoj Banwala. Surely you knew love is a nasty business here. Surely you knew you were breaking an unwritten law. Surely you knew they would hound you and kill you. Surely you knew a woman is not allowed desires of her own. You should know, however, your friends stood by you. They came over for tea. You should know your sister fought and is still fighting. You should know your mother was the only person in the village who voted. You should know your love is still raging in the world. This is the next section, and it's called Sonnets from the Indian Nation State. It's based on a series of sonnets by an extraordinary poet from the 19th century English tradition called Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And these are poems she wrote, sonnets she wrote for her acute Bela Bhatia type heterosexual desire for Robert Browning. She just loved this man, and she wrote these, I mean, they're like Meera poems, not this Meera, but the real Meera. I mean, bhakti type of poems. I just love this man, or just, I want to just die for this man kind of poem. I turned them into poems about the Indian nation state. Something you can't love at all. Yeah, you try so hard you can't. I don't love nation states in general. I think like Einstein, that they are the measles of, nationalism is the measles of humanity. I'm a Tagorean on nationalism. Tagore, who had the best ideas on nationalism, simply said nationalism is bullshit. Okay? So these are two sonnets I'm going to read, or three maybe. We have time. How are we doing for time? 6 o'clock. We have time. So three sonnets from the Indian nation state. That is love sonnets to a man turned into hate sonnets for India. Okay? So this is a sonnet about doing relief work in Bombay riots. I told you, I cut my teeth on the Bombay riots. So we were taking food packets to Musalmans at VT station. These were businessmen who had businesses in Pindi Bazaar, Mamadari Road, har jagah. And we were giving them chawal, dal. Some Tam Bram woman from Kolaba made it. I was like, yaar, tu kaisi chutiya aurat hai yaar. मुसलमान को तुम दाल चावल और कोई घटिया सा सब्जी दे रहे हो. But anyway, पैकेट में दे रहे, वो यूपी जा रहे थे, ट्रेन में भर भर के. They were just leaving the city in droves. So this is a man, I met an old Muslim man, and he took the food from me, and he gave me this look that thought, I mean, if looks could kill, I would be a very small pile of ashes there. This is a sonnet to him. And the sonnets, by the way, all have words from Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Okay, so half the sonnet is Elizabeth Barrett Browning, half is Ashley Tellis. I lift my heavy heart up solemnly. This is Elizabeth. As once Elizabeth, her sepulchral urn, and looking into your eyes, this is me, I'm looking into the eyes of the Muslim man, and looking into your eyes, I overturn the food packet at your feet. Behold your rage, how the red, wild sparkles dimly do burn. Back to Elizabeth. Through the ashen greyness. It's amazing how my poem flowed into Elizabeth and how Elizabeth flowed back into my poem. It was quite marvelous. I thought I was having some kind of Ouija board communication with Elizabeth Barrett Browning. So dimly do burn through the ashen greyness. If your foot in scorn could tread them out to darkness utterly, it might be well perhaps. But you leave this, back to me from Elizabeth, but you leave this city with them on your body, your face, these ashes. Your look singes me. Would it make a difference if I said I was not Hindu? I almost said to him, yaar, main Hindu nahi hu yaar. But I didn't. Would it make a difference if I said I was not Hindu? What is there to say to you? Your face engraved in this city, unforming as you take the food and my eyes fall. This is a poem for Soni Sori. If you don't know Soni Sori, again you should kill yourself. She's a tribal woman from Chhattisgarh, school teacher, amazing. Continues to fight against the state single-handedly. They took her to hospital, they put stones in her vagina. There's a video of her on YouTube writhing in pain with stones in her vagina. That's Soni Sori. She works with Bela Bhatia, they're best friends. Soni Sori. And yet, because you overcome this torture, your body writhing, screaming in that video, you lying on the hospital stretcher, you can prevail against my fears and fling your words like the acid they threw acid in her face, like the acid thrown at your face, at us, and make our hearts grow too close against yours. This is Elizabeth. Which shake when we are alone. The stones in your body could not break you. Your voice quivers but will not go quiet. Nothing and no one can steer you off your course. Soni Sori, Soni Sori, Soni Sori. This is us marching in Delhi. मैं और कुछ चूतिया ऐसा वाले जा रहे थे सोनी सोरी को प्रोटेस्ट करने उसके, and these ऐसा वाला चूतियास यार, they start breaking the police barricade and start hitting the police. And उमर चक्रवर्ती और मैं यहाँ पे खड़े कि यार क्या हो रहा है, हम दोनों बूढ़े खड़े हैं बस कोर्ट के बाहर, these people are hitting them. So how is ISA different from ABVP? Hello. So anyway, Soni Sori, Soni Sori, Soni Sori. We chant your name as we march along. You have taken hold of reason and shown us its true purpose, which is treason. And this is the last of the sonnets that I'm going to read to you. It's about a Manipuri woman called Manorama and a bunch of Manipuri women who got pissed off with what they did to Manorama. So Manorama is a woman. They accused her of being whatever, militant. They picked her up at 1 o'clock in the morning, they beat her, they smashed her, they raped her, they gang raped her, and then they killed her. They shot her dead. And they claimed that she was running away. वो भाग रही थी और उन्होंने गोली मारी. तो क्योंकि भाग रहा है कोई इंसान और तुम गोली मारोगे तो गोली पीठ पे लगेगी ना, गोली उसके चूत में लगी है. There are bullet mark wounds in her vagina. They shot her in the vagina. Okay? Let the world's sharpness like a clasping knife shut in upon itself. This is Elizabeth. And do no harm in these held hands of love, soft and warm. You stand naked. Now these are Maitai women. Please remember, Maitai women are Hindu women, number one. They are super conservative women. They have a Latasena of their own called Myra Paibi. They go around beating men with sticks if they drink alcohol. Deeply conservative women who are standing completely naked outside the Indian Army with a poster saying what? You stand naked, the poster held across says, Indian Army, rape us. Bodies bent by babies, disappeared, tortured, dead. A dead child is an ache in the womb. A dead child makes the blood boil over. A woman raped, shot in the womb, made you seethe. With each other, you feel as safe as witches by a charm. This is Elizabeth. Look at how it fit. With each other you feel as safe as witches by a charm against the stab of worldlings who are rife but weak to attaint you. Your words, hysterical, ululating, like the Mashata Devi Draupadi story, ululating, Indian army, take our flesh. And this is the last section that I'm going to read you from, the last section of the book. It's a very short section, the poems are really short, so you'll be happy to know that if you're tired of my reading. There's chai and pakoda, please have them, they'll get cold and they'll get bad. This poem is called State, and it's the last poem I read before I read my Stan Swami poem and my Devangana poem, and then we are done and we still have an hour for discussion. Great. So this is a poem called State, and it's about the current state. And again, it's about the limitations and the miseries of left-wing and secular politics. I'm trying to urge us through this poetry book to simply rethink how we engage with the state and how we engage with politics. And I'm saying that unless you engage with the subjectivity of the people who are, including you and me, not just people tortured and put in jail like Devangana, but anyone, unless you engage with the terrors of their psyche, you're not going to contest the left, the right. You're not. Modi will laugh at you till you're, all the way to the bank. Okay, as it is laughing with Sehmat exhibition of Congress and left to chodo yaar. State. This poem is called State. The ones who care have been. It's a villanelle. This is the other point I wanted to make about form. So as you can see, I've used the sonnet, I've used the villanelle. I have two sestinas in the poem. You know, Indian English poetry has become over the last 30 years, in a different generation which I grew up with, Adil Jasawala, Eunice D'Souza, Arvind Krishna Malhotra, these guys knew how to write poetry. The generations that followed, starting with mine is Hoskote, Arundhati Subramaniam, starting with mine, have produced mostly shit. In between, you'll have a sudden person who is intelligent on the question of form, 1.5% here, 0.5% there. But actually, uniformly, according to me, I've told you I'm not generous. Vivek is generous. He'll give you a much more generous account of Indian poetry in English. But I think 98% of it is shit. And they don't engage with form. And form is a difficult question, and it's linked to my question about politics. What forms do politics take, right? When we think about a protest, or we think about reform, the question of reform in the 19th century, or we think about any form of, politics is a question of form. It's a question of how you take a stand. I remember I had this discussion with Mohinder once, and Mohinder made a very important point to me about Hannah Arendt, and the point she makes about that with politics, you have to get your hands dirty. There's no purism of politics. You can't say, like, these chutiya lefties in Jantar Mantar, they'll stand, 2 log hai ek party mein, 3 log hai dusre party mein, 4 log hai, alag-alag khade honge ki bhai isse mat mil. Aur Ashley, tu RYJS ka poster pakad raha hai, tu KNS ka poster pakad, are yaar chutiye, tum 4 log ho aur Obama ke khilaf tum protest laga rahe ho aur ek dusre se lad rahe ho, you can't stand together. Yaar left should die yaar, khatam ho gayi baat. So anyway, so what are the forms of politics that deal with the forms of poetry? So when you're writing in English, Vivek will testify, Meera will testify. Both of them also know Indian languages. Meera knows Urdu very well. Hindi, of course. She's a North Indian Christian, by the way. So my point is, when you're dealing with the question of form, it was a big struggle for me. I thought, Adil, for example, Adil Jasawala writes like a Britisher. But he is the Britisher. He's a Parsi. He eats with a fork and spoon and says, oh dear. I'm not a Parsi. I didn't grow up saying, oh dear. I grew up in Baikala, yaar. हम लोग बोलते थे बहन की चूत तेरी माँ की चूत हम ऐसे बात करते हैं तो when we write in English कैसे लिखेंगे हम लोग and what is form and also what is rhythm, how we speak in English. When I was in Cambridge, they thought I was the weirdest guinea pig they'd ever seen in their life. They took me to the language lab in Cambridge and they said, listen, we need to make you say this sentence and we need to record you on a machine. And I said, why? They said, because we haven't heard an accent like yours in our lives. And we understand you. We don't understand any other Indian. They seem to have a mother tongue interference. You seem to not have one. But and we understand you, but you're not English, and your English is so fucking weird. And this is the line they made me say in this lab. I'll never forget it. The line was, I'll do it first as the British would say it. We have at least one British person here, Andre. He'll do it better than me, but I'll do my best British impersonation. So the line is, two, which is, the British have a soft T, which we don't have. I say tea, give me some tea, yaar. But in Britain you say tea. So 2 cars The British, after all, they are the left testicle of the US. They do roll their R's a little. 2 cars go down the road. They made me say, I said, 2 cars go down the road. The machine went booming and bapping, and they said, what is this accent? I mean, we understand you're saying 2 cars go down the road, but how the fuck are you saying it? So, at the level of sound, how do you write a line of English? When I'm doing the iambic pentameter, I'm thinking, no, when I say this word, I stress here. But according to the English word, the stress is not there, it's on the next syllable. So form is a question, and I link it to politics. What form are you going to take against Modi? You can't say fascism hai, secular poster lagao, Muslim skull dikhao niche, uspe Hindu pair lagao. Kya hai yaar? Modi is laughing. So what are the forms of politics you're going to take? So this is state. It's a villanelle. A villanelle is an Italian form. I mean, look it up. The ones who care have been thrown in jail, and we go on pretending not to know. Fear eats the soul. Fear Eats the Soul is one of my favorite German filmmakers' films. Rainer Fassbinder made a film called Fear Eats the Soul. It's stunning, about a relationship between an older woman and a black man, older German woman and a black man. It's just stunning. It just made me cry for like a month. Fear eats the soul, hatred fuels the world. Muslim men are lynched on the road. In Haryana every day. Yeah. Dalit women raped and killed for show. The ones who care have been thrown in jail. Devangana Kolita, right? Have we only reaped what we had sowed? The earth is gutted and plumbed for more. Fear eats the soul, hatred fuels the world. Adivasis beaten, killed, their land gored. Kashmir destroyed, TV anchors aglow. The ones who care have been thrown in jail. Universities hollowed, JNU. Stooges bestowed. The thinking anti-national, bootlickers gung-ho. Fear eats the soul, hatred fuels the world. Is there no reversing of this mode? Are we to perish of this vertigo? The ones who care have been thrown in jail. Fear eats the soul, hatred fuels the world. And my last 2 poems. These are poems I've just written after the book, because these things happened after the book. Devangana went to jail after my book. Stan Swami died after my book. This is a poem for Stan Swami. And Stan Swami is the perfect illustration of my point about politics. Stan Swami had a politics that nobody understood. When his lawyers in Bombay, Mihir Desai and others said, कि हम आपके लिए bail apply कर रहे हैं, आप निकलो अभी bail health grounds पे हम apply कर रहे हैं. उसने कहा मुझे नहीं चाहिए. I want to be absolved of all these false charges and I want to go back to my people.